Okay, so we are Daniel and Clara, two humans who exist as one artists on a journey exploring dimensions real and imagined, the results of which consist in moving image, photography, installation, and correspondence works. Since meeting in 2010, we've been dedicated to a shared life of creative experimentation, having discarded our birth genders, nationalities, and family names to become two halves of a single artist. We're interested in the phenomenological experience of being human, investigating the structures and layers that inform our experience of reality. We pay particular attention to the psychological dimension of experience, how emotion and imagination inform our understanding of what reality is and what it means to be a human being. A central interest in our work is in exploring how we create meaning in our lives, how we take the chaotic material of existence and organize these and make sense of them through narratives. We often use forms such as diaries, travel logs, and letters as artifacts from our explorations. This talk is a part of an Arts Council funded project called Landscape Imaginary, which we are working on throughout 2021. It's in part a research project exploring the relationship between psychology and place, particularly the way that as human beings, we imbue landscapes with meaning. And it's also a period of creating new work, some of which we'll be talking about today. So yeah, in this talk, we're going to be taking a journey through some of our projects, particularly ones that have landscapes as a central focus. And we'll be starting talking about where we are now and the work we've been doing recently, but we'll be going back and forth through time and covering a range of landscapes and places, including Avebury, Mersea Island, Hastings, Mayfield, Portugal, Ireland, and maybe a few other spots along the way. Someone's got their mic on. Can you make sure your microphones are turned off, please?
Okay. The places we're going to be talking about today are mostly rural environments. These are environments inhabited by humans and affected by humans, but where there's also a strong presence of nature and non-human elements. This is a matter of personal condition. It's the kind of places that we are personally most drawn to and that we deal with in our work. And traditionally, these places are the subject of landscape art. For us, the landscape is a fantasy. It's a construct of the mind. As one puts a fence around a garden to mark where it starts and ends, we place a mental frame around a view in which a narrative and a meaning is expressed. The landscape as a thing in itself doesn't exist outside of human perception and artifice. There are trees, rocks, mountains, all manner of living things, geological phenomena and atmospheric conditions happening at different timescales, all interconnected, but also separate and independent, pieces in themselves that we mentally and pictorially frame together to form a landscape. Casually, what we mean by the word landscape is simply all that we can see from where we stand to the horizon, the space between the ground and the sky and everything that lays between. But when we start to unpick this, we soon discover that landscape, even since the first users of the word, refers to something more than just an objective notation of all in view. It expresses the one who views, and what they choose to see and how they depict it expresses their attitude towards the world and towards nature. This framing of place is now made more apparent as every viewer sees the world through a camera screen, each one picture maker, constructing an image which unconsciously expresses their view of the view. their ideology inescapable, their fantasy made real and made meaningful by a snap. We're very interested in this, how engaging with making images of something which seems to be external becomes in fact a way of externalizing something internal. And when we think that we are just capturing a view, the image that we're making is really creating a reality which reflects ourselves. So we've spent the last year on Mersea Island, which sits at the end of the Blackwater estuary, about 30 minutes from Colchester in Essex. We were staying with family here about a year ago when the lockdown was announced. And we had only planned to stay for a short period while we were researching for a project. But due to the lockdown, all of our plans changed, and we ended up staying much longer than we had anticipated. We were very grateful in a way to be out of the city and in a relatively isolated rural place while all of this was going on. As the daily news were coming out with the increasing case numbers and death tolls, and also as we all started to navigate new ways of coexisting in public and private spaces. Personally, we found relief in taking our permitted 1 hour walk per day to go and explore the island. Mersea Island is quite well populated, but during the first couple of weeks of lockdown, we could go for a walk and not see a single person or hear a single car. This was such an unusual experience. It was quite magical. We took to walking the same route every day. We would go out of the house, down an avenue of neatly gardened houses, down to the beach, then walked along the sand and shingle towards a wooded area of entangled overgrowth and closely grown trees, which we call the Dragon's Nest. And then along a meandering tree-lined lane, past fields and back to a main road, back to the house. We walked this route over and over, first once a day and then twice. And taking the same path, walking in circles, this act of repetition attuned our attention to the details of the surroundings. We got to know particular trees and features of the landscape, and also birds, which we became familiar with by observing their territorial disputes and routines. And as time passed, we witnessed the arrival of spring, and we saw it in a way that we've never seen it before. David Hockney, who spent a lot of time looking and depicting landscape, has said that spring is not a season but an event, and that's how we experienced it last year. For us, the spring was an event of such drama and beauty that in some ways we couldn't help but feel that personally for us the lockdown was a great gift. But at the same time, this experience was affected by the impact of the virus and everything that carried with it, all anxiety and fear, and also a sense of uncertainty and disorientation as we began to realize that some of the changes that were happening were going to be much more permanent than we had first expected. So we're going to talk about two projects that have grown from these experiences. One is a series of videos, and the other is a series of letters.
So just before the first lockdown, we were given an old iPhone by a friend, and we'd not used a smartphone before, but we're always really interested in different tools for creating images and videos. And we wanted to see what this device could be used for in the context of our work. As you'll see throughout this talk, that in all our projects, we're really interested in experimenting with different image making devices and finding the particular qualities of those tools and how they can be used to express something. So we carried this camera phone with us on our daily walks, and we began making short videos of the landscapes. And what developed was a series of short videos called On the Island. These are short, approximately 1 minute videos, and we released them on Instagram as we were making them. Each one depicts us standing or sitting in the landscapes of the island, engaged in the act of looking and listening to the world around us. And we started these out of a need to create something about the experiences we were having, but we really felt unable at this point to create something complicated. And it was really necessary that we made something that was as simple and direct as possible. So we stripped back all of the layers and got rid of as much as possible. We reduced the action to an absolute bare minimum. And the films themselves are unedited, they use synchronized sound, and pretty much what you see is what comes out of the camera. It's just us in these landscapes for a short moment in time. And we had some references in mind. We were thinking a little bit about the origins of cinema, the early films by the Lumiere brothers, and also the history of painting was on our minds, this depiction of figures in a landscape. But the most important thing was that we would simply go out and experience these places and record these actions of looking and listening. So as we created more of them, and there's over 70 now, we understood the importance of time in this project, how a different perspective is revealed through repetition, through the accumulation of parts over a period of time, and how through this we began to really understand the impact of light, weather, and seasons on the place, but then in turn on us. As human beings, we look for patterns to create meaning, and the patterns of nature often serve as structures for creating a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. We look out for patterns that exist out there in the world, and we relate them to what is happening within ourselves, and to the cycles that exist in our own psychology. We find correspondence to the cycles that exist in nature. So essentially what we're seeing in the On the Island series is the effect of the movement of the Earth as it goes around the sun, and how drastically this affects everything, how it affects the landscape, but also how it affects us personally.
So also during the first lockdown, we created a series of letters, and these were sent out to strangers, people that we knew of, but that we hadn't met in person. We saw these as a form of diary, and also as a narrative experience, which was transmitted directly from us to the reader. Narrative has always interested us. Initially, from working with moving images, we experimented with different approaches to creating film narratives, taking apart the conventions of cinema storytelling to understand the ideologies that are inherent in those forms, and seeking other approaches with different ideological ramifications. So narrative is always on our minds. Since 2017, we have also used ourselves in our work, centering our narratives around our experiences and using ourselves as the two human subjects of our ongoing questions about perception, reality, and being human. So with a work like these letters, we wanted to continue exploring how we create narratives around our experiences. In particular, looking at how the stories that we tell about ourselves and about our lives both help us make a sense of reality, but also create it. the letters merge inner and outer experiences. Imagined experiences and external experiences are treated equally in these narratives. And we're interested in the idea that each person that would receive these letters would find themselves also a participant in our story. And this approach of making first-person experiences for viewers is something that we work with a lot. We were also really keen to create physical works at this point. Due to the lockdown, we were spending a lot of our time on a computer screen, and all our communication was happening through the screen too. And we felt a strong need to communicate in a more material way. So the narrative that unfolds in the letters was a way for us to deal with the pandemic. They're artifacts from a process of psychological orientation that we've been engaged in during this whole strange year. And reading them now, we see the beginnings of us becoming attuned to the island. When we were first here, we were visitors, we were at a different rhythm, but over time we've started to put down some roots, and now we feel like the island has claimed us. We've only left once over the last year for one weekend, and the rest of the time we've been here in the same place, walking the same routes over and over. And as we look again, as the seasons and the weather and the tides transform the landscape around us, we are becoming a part of this landscape and tuning ourselves into it as well.
So we'd like to jump back in time now to the first of our works that has landscape and place in this as the sort of main focus. This is a project called Exteriors. In 2012, we spent a summer living in Hastings on the south coast of England, and much of our time there was spent walking in the country park that is between Hastings and Fairlight. We'd head out most mornings with our video cameras and explore this beautiful green space, and we really loved it there. It's sort of this amazing kind of rolling hills and very sort of steep rocky cliffs and beaches with these great big boulders, and we really sort of had our imagination activated by this environment and really enjoyed sort of this wonderful summer of exploring and filming. And the pre-Raphaelites were quite often on our minds at this time, because the house where we were staying was sat next to St. Clement's Church, where Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Lizzie Siddal were married. And the house where they lived was on the high street in the next street from us. And there also was William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millay, and Edward Lear had also spent time in Hastings. So these artists were kind of frequently on our minds. One evening we were sat in our room reading when we heard these screams and shouts in the street below. And we looked out the window and people were kind of coming out of their house and gathering in crowds and all heading in the same direction. And we grabbed our video camera and followed them, really excited to find out that the beacon was going to be lit. So Hastings is quite similar to sort of other Sussex towns and villages in that they take these community rituals very seriously. The nearby Lewes is known for Bonfire Night, which is always a very dramatic event. And Hastings itself has Jack in the Green, which is a spring festival, which has violent and dramatic undertones to it. So we knew that for whatever reason it was that the beacon was going to be lit, that it was going to be an exciting event. And that evening we shot a short film which is called Exterior Fire at Fairlight Glen. And we're going to show that to you now. So we're going to put a link in the comments. So the things we experienced that evening, and even more so the memories of those experiences, became the raw materials for this film. As we stood on the cliff top watching the fire roaring away above our heads and over the tops of the crowds, we found ourselves thinking of Far From the Madding Crowd. There's a scene in the book and also in the film, the 1967 film adaptation of it, in which a barn is on fire and the farmers are running around trying to put the fire out. And somehow the intensity of this experience, standing there with the crowd watching the fire, brought this scene to mind. And we also found ourselves connecting this to the same scene in the same book where there's sheep going over the cliff tops at night. And this painting that you can see here by William Holman Hunt is painted just along from where we were in Hastings. And somehow all the connections between all of these things came together in our minds as we were editing the film. So the true experience of that evening was in part made up of the external reality, us standing there watching this burning beacon on the cliff tops, and also in part an inner experience, the emotional and mental experience, and all of the personal associations that were coming to mind out of this, drawing on these things that we'd seen and read in the past. And we realized then that our experience of reality is one made up of many layers and of memories, and that meaning is made somewhere in all of these connections. So in this early work, we started to move towards this idea that shapes our work until this day. And that is that reality is this complex, mysterious thing that's built of these hundreds of layers of inner and outer experience. And the most fascinating thing to us is that all of us will have a totally unique experience of reality that will differ from everybody else's. No two people will ever experience something in exactly the same way as someone else.
So we were in Hastings for just that one summer. And after leaving Hastings, we found ourselves broke and homeless and unsure about where we could go. But then we had an opportunity to go to Portugal and live in a rent-free house where we had a garden so we could grow our own food. So we moved there and we went to live in this small, misty seaside town in the north near Porto. This began a period of intense experimentation and studying for us. We dedicated all of our time to making art and questioning what this really meant for us. We became very interested in alchemy and dreams and the tarot and mythology. And we were very influenced by Carl Jung and reading about Jungian psychology. And we lived there for 6 years. And while this was great and gave us the time and the freedom to dedicate ourselves completely to our work, we never really felt like we could connect to the place and the culture there. So we often had a feeling that we didn't know where we belonged. And not feeling a connection with place meant that our work was very focused on looking inwards and exploring inner states and worlds. And it felt a little bit like we were living in a world of our own, sustained by our imaginations, but cut off somehow in a kind of isolation or exile. Then in 2017, we had a growing interest in our work from a lot of people in the UK. So we came here for a tour. We were screening some of our films in universities and art venues across the country for 2 weeks. So we traveled from the south up to Scotland and then back down again. And we were instantly excited by the landscapes that we were seeing and that we were passing by on the train. And we were filming along the way. And we decided to make a film out of this, but we didn't have a very clear idea of what we were going to do. And then on the last day of this journey, we visited Avebury. And for those who don't know it, Avebury is a village in Wiltshire which exists inside a stone circle. It's the largest stone circle in Britain. And this place had a massive impact on us. The few hours that we spent there were an incredible experience and completely unexpected. We walked the perimeter looking at all the stones. And unlike Stonehenge in Avebury, you can't see the stone circle all in one view, so you have to walk. And somehow this creates a more intimate experience of the stones. You can get very close to them, you can touch them. Each stone is different. Each one feels like it has its own personality and its own story. Some of the stones are gigantic. They go from between 12 to 18 feet tall. And also some of the stones have been broken up and taken by the villagers to build their houses. And also away from the village, about a mile away, there is Silbury Hill, which is a huge, mysterious prehistoric mound that nobody knows why it was built. So it feels like you really get a glimpse of the vastness of time when you're there. You know that these monuments have been built by people like us. And like us, they were trying to find a way to exist in the landscape. And they were arranging things in a way to make it more meaningful for them, or out of some mysterious inner necessity. And this really resonated with us. This place changed us. It's changed the way that we thought about ourselves and thought about our work. And we realized that we needed to be back in the UK and we needed to be making work about these landscapes.
Before going to Avebury, we really knew very little about the place. We'd seen Derek Jarman's paintings and his Super 8 film, and we knew the work of Paul Nash, but we didn't really know anything about the history of the place. And early on in this tour that we were taking, we met up with a friend at the Tate Britain, and on hearing that we were going to Avebury for the first time, he recommended that we watch Children of the Stones, an eerie 1970s TV series which was shot on location there. And we watched this in the evenings in the B&Bs during the tour, so that by the time we arrived in Avebury, we carried all of this with us. We had a little bit of Jarman and Nash and the atmosphere of Children of the Stones. And because of the significance of our experience there, afterwards we became completely obsessed and have spent many hours researching and finding out as much as we can about the place. And we've learned a lot more about the significance that this place has had for artists. There's, of course, Nash and Jarman, but so many more, such as Joe Tilson, David Inshaw, Bruce Lacey, and many, many more. This place seems to have come to them at a certain significant turning point in their creative lives. And it seems to have always acted as almost like a catalyst for a personal change. And this really excited us because the fact that we'd gone there and had a similar experience really made us feel like we were connected to some kind of tradition. Yeah, this felt sort of very important to us. So Avebury's had this resonance for many artists, particularly throughout the 20th century. And it seems to be something to do with the age of the site, the fact that it dates back to our Neolithic ancestors. But I think it's also because of the mystery of it, the fact that we never really can know for sure why the stones were erected and what they were used for, and what their original purpose was. And this wonderful sense of unknowing means that they can become receptors to our projections, and that when we encounter them, we also encounter what we bring to them. For us personally, the monoliths and particularly Silbury Hill represent the great mystery of being human, and this great mystery of our existence. The film that we made was called Notes from a Journey. It's a 70-minute film which uses footage that we shot on the tour, but is not simply presented as a document. What we created is a film that is a journey in itself. It is an experience for the viewers as they watch it. As we mentioned earlier, we've always been interested in narrative, particularly seeking new forms of narrative structure. We see narrative as a way of making sense of the world. It helps us define ourselves and understand that things that happen to us in our lives. And we also think of narrative as being the way that a tool that we use to create reality. So in our work, when we experiment with different forms of narrative, what we're seeking are structures that we can use to organize images and ideas and reveal some kind of truths about human experience, but without ever pinning anything down to some fixed or pre-existing perspective. And we believe that if we can find new forms of narrative, we can form new ideas about what it means to be human. One of the ways that we've done this in our work is to take non-human forms and transcribe them into narrative forms. In this particular film, we took the form of Silbury Hill and used this to inform our narrative structure. So we organized our footage around the pattern of two overlapping spirals going around the hill, one going up and one going down. So that as you move along the line you go up, you pass through the journey that's going down, and this conventional experience of time, this linear time, is disrupted. And the climax of the film is in the center. It's the high point, rather than at the end where it would normally be. You wouldn't necessarily know this when you're watching the film, but it can be felt. When we make a work, we are focused on creating experiences where you can sense that there is some kind of structure and organizing principles behind it, but that you shouldn't be able to instantly recognize and work out. We really want our work to be mysterious, and it's important that the meaning is sensed that it's there, but it's somehow slightly out of reach. And I think this is primarily because we're not making art to have a message. We're not making art that tells you what to think or feel. We instead want to create a space where you encounter something which you have to make sense of on your own terms. And through this process, you become more aware of your own perceptive mechanisms, and you can become aware of how you truly think and feel in relation to the thing that you're encountering. So as we've described, our work grows from these encounters with place. But simply photographing or filming these places isn't enough to express the reality of these experiences. To truly express it, we must consider all of these different layers that are coming into play: the physical sensations in our body, the thoughts and memories that are buzzing around in our minds, and all of these personal and cultural associations that are activated within us. So in order to do this, we experiment with new forms of narrative, and we also experiment with the position that we place you in as the viewer. And in a way, you could describe what we're doing is making works of art that are equivalents to the initial experience that we had. And then these equivalents in turn become experiences in themselves.
Yeah. One of the techniques that we use for this in Notes from a Journey is something we call the color fields. The color fields are flat fields of digitally created color that is placed over footage of landscapes. And the color obscures the landscape in such a way where is barely visible, and your senses are overwhelmed by the color. We used the colors red, blue, white, and a very dark gray. And also these shots are kept very long. So what happens when you watch these in a dark space is that the impact of the color is so strong, especially when it cuts from one color to another, that you can physically feel your eyes adjusting contracting and expanding at beyond the usual rate. And it takes a moment to discern these landscapes that are veiled behind the color field. This is by creating this disruption, and as we strive to see, we can become more aware of the many physical mechanisms and the mental processes that are happening and are involved in perception. We have a clip to show you.
So Avebury has remained significant to us. It was the catalyst for us moving to the UK, and it's been the subject of a number of works since then. And it's come to act as almost like our personal psychological center of the world. And when we moved to the UK in 2019, we returned to Avebury and made a series of works which includes letters, photographs, and a film called Revisiting. Revisiting is about the act of returning to a place of personal significance. It's about looking again at something which already has layers of personal meaning and which also holds layers of historical and cultural meaning. Revisiting takes the form of a holiday film. It was shot on mini DV and plays across 2 screens. And we include in the film text from our notebooks and diaries. And like all of the other works, it layers these inner and outer experiences. It's a very different film to Notes from a Journey in many ways. Notes from a Journey is a film that never settles or feels fully connected to place. It's filled with shots from train windows and traveling through and floating through the landscape. And these shots with the color fields where you're never able to fully see the landscape clearly. But Revisiting feels much more like we're there. In Notes from a Journey, you only glimpse us in the landscapes a couple of times. When you do see us, we're inside the B&B, sitting in the dark, and it has a depression to it. But in Revisiting, you see us actively engaging with the landscape, walking around the standing stones and taking Polaroid photographs of them. We're going to show you another clip now so you can see what Revisiting is like and how it differs from what you've just seen from Notes from a Journey.
So in our research about Avebury, we also read a lot about Neolithic cultures, and an interesting idea that stuck with us was how they think that particular places became sacred, how a sense of meaningfulness came to be imbued in certain areas of the landscape. So in the transitional period from being hunter-gatherers to farmers, our ancestors would move according to the seasons, tracking animals and staying for a season in a particular location before moving on. And then at the end of the season, before leaving, they would gather all of their rubbish, all the debris from cooking and from hunting, and they would bury it in pits. These pits over time would become markers that they would come back to. And with each generation, they would return to the same place, forming a tradition and a sense of continuity. Now we imagine that maybe after a few generations, the original reason why these pits themselves were made was forgotten. But they would know that these markers were somehow connected with their parents and their grandparents, and that they had made a base in those places. So they helped establish this feeling of interconnectedness between their family and the area through this mystery. And this helped us understand also how much time and repetition are a key to creating meaning, and how a sense of connection to a place comes about. And that a sacred place is a site where one both projects a sense of the self and connects to something bigger than oneself, whether it be our ancestors or gods or anything else. Okay, so we can't talk about landscape without at least mentioning weather. And we've always been very sensitive to weather, and it has had a kind of key presence in our work, especially in our moving image work, in the sound. And we see weather and the elements as an active component of the landscape that affects us and also affects our experiences of place. We love how weather can transform our reality, how, for example, a familiar place can feel so different after it snows, everything covered in white, but also the subtle way in which the light and the sound change. Weather acts on our perception and on our bodies. And sometimes this is in a strong way, but also sometimes very subtly. But we're always under its influence. We're particularly obsessed about mist, and we've made a few works about it. A few years ago, we were in Ireland for a couple of weeks working on some projects with friends. And on about the third day, while we were staying in this big house on a cliff top, we all took a walk up the hills as this thick fog was rolling in from the sea. And we're used to dramatic mist, as the coast in Portugal where we were living is prone to it. But this fog in Ireland felt quite different. It was thicker, and there was more of a sense of foreboding about it. We climbed the hill, and as we were climbing, we became aware of changes in sound. Our vision was limited, but somehow our sense of hearing felt more acute. We had our Super 8 camera with us, and we captured a few frames. And then suddenly we realized that we were alone. We had somehow wandered from our friends and couldn't see them anymore. But we decided to just walk on and completely surrender to this experience of unknowing and indulge ourselves in the sense of being lost in an unknown place. And then almost as quickly as it came, the fog started to recede and the view became clear. we saw that our friends were just in the field below us, and that above us there were sheep amongst rock and mud, and that the house was actually in sight and not that far away. We felt that we had been momentarily taken to another world and then back again. This was a really clear experience of the power of this weather phenomenon for us. And it also made us think about the impact that this has had on Irish myths, which have so many stories about fairy worlds that are hidden in the landscape just out of sight. Interior Landscapes is a film that formed itself of these experiences, the limiting of vision, and how this both heightened the senses and activated the imagination for us.
Our attention to the more subtle shifts in weather has increased dramatically over the past year. Living in one place and looking at the same landscapes every single day has drawn our attention to how the small changes in temperature, light, and weather can really transform the world around us. Last October, we were commissioned by the Slow Film Festival to create a moving image work in Mayfield. Mayfield's the village where the festival would normally take place, but as the festival was going to be online this year, they invited us to create a work there that would somehow capture the sense of place. We made this 18-minute film called En Plein Air, and it's set over a single day and captures 8 moments at different times from just before first light until after dark. And we're present in the film, acting like human barometers, responding to the atmospheric conditions. And we designed it in a way as if all of our other human faculties had been stripped away, and that the defining factor in our experience was weather. So the weekend that we shot this film was the only time we've left the island in the last year. And the film feels very much under the spell of the pandemic. Even though we don't directly refer to the virus in the film, this sense of anxiety is really present. And also we were thinking about how this last year has really attuned our awareness to the impact of an invisible non-human entity and the effect that this can have on everything about human life, how we interact with each other, our relationships to our own bodies, and how we move and interact with the world around us. We're going to show you one short clip from En Plein Air. This is one of the 8 moments.
Okay, so to end, we just want to mention one more project, and then if anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Yeah, so last spring, we had planned to go to Cornwall, but of course, because of the pandemic, we were confined to our home on Mersea Island and were unable to go. At first, we were very disappointed as we had a very exciting plan of the different standing stones and ancient sites we were going to visit. And we were really looking forward to camping out and immersing ourselves in the Cornish landscape for a few days. But after our initial disappointment, we realized that with all the research that we had done, the trip had in a way already started. We'd already been looking at guidebooks and Google Maps, and a picture of what the trip would be had partly formed. So we pitched a tent in our garden, and we gathered our cameras and sound recorder, and we took an imagined journey to Cornwall, using the available space in the garden as if we were on a holiday, and referring to images from films and literature and other artworks to build an imagined version of the Cornish landscape. This journey is documented in photographs and a home video and a series of collages and the illustrated diary. And we also presented a live performance via Zoom from the tent in our garden, in which we read the diary out loud. So in this piece, the imagined landscapes that we experienced kind of manifested itself in these different forms through the different works, and in a way kind of became a new reality and an actual experience. And yeah, so that concludes our presentation. Thanks so much for listening. And yeah, if anyone has any comments or questions or anything you'd like to share, please do.
Yeah, feel free to turn your mics on and ask, or put it in the chat. It's up to you.
I have a question.
Hi.
Sure. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
I have two questions actually. One is about the first film of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Someone actually wrote it in the chat I saw about the sound.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested, yeah, whether it was recorded after, or it didn't maybe seem like it was during the time. And yeah, I wondered about the presence of people at that event.
Mm-hmm.
And how they interact with the filming, or if it was a bit more secretive. Or And then the second question is about, well, all of the work, I guess. You are often together within the works, and yeah, when you talk about your practice together, you seem very kind of almost self-sufficient, like there is no one else involved. So I was wondering if there is anyone behind the camera at some point, because you're both in it, or you really work with like setting it up and then you are getting in front of the camera. Yeah, those
Thank you. Questions. Yeah, so I think I'll answer the second question first. We have, in the past, we have worked with various collaborators, and actually our earlier work had a lot more people involved, and we've done films with other people in the sort of moving image work, and sort of crew sizes ranging from about 2 to about 30. But over the time, it sort of became more important that we were in the work, and we needed to be able to work on a daily basis, and it became much harder to work in a structure that was more like a conventional filmmaking structure. So we had to sort of develop our own approaches, and it really became about us doing everything at a certain point. So for the last, I think maybe 2 to 3 years, it's really just been us and the camera and the sound recorders, and no crew at all, just us kind of operating the equipment. And this in turn informs how the work is made. quite often the camera is on a tripod, and you know, we'll be in the frame, or there are moments where one of us will be in and one of us is behind the camera. So we have sort of a system for dealing with that.
Yeah. Actually, maybe that connects also with your first question about how the sound was constructed for the exterior fire affair like Glen film. I think one of the reasons why we felt like we wanted to get involved in all the different aspects of filmmaking is because we realized all of them really affect the experience that the viewer is going to have. And sound is an incredible part of this. And so from the beginning of our work, we've actually, most of our films use non-sync sound. And sometimes we use the sound that was captured through the cameras, but we don't necessarily use it synced with the footage that it was shot with. And in Exterior Fire, I think that is what's happening. There is the sound is layered after the film was edited, and in a way the sound is adding these extra layers of narrative that we spoke about, the associations with Far From the Madding Crowd and our English coasts, and building the more intangible part of what that experience was is built in through the sound. I hope that answers the question. If there's something I've forgotten, say.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's nice to hear. Maybe I could just follow up a tiny with the question about the sound again on the last piece, or the first fire piece. I guess you have this like beat that's going through it as well. Sorry, I have a lot of background sound. And then there's a sheep or something.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like, we always have this feeling that we're interested in reality, but to simply record something that is there doesn't seem to kind of do the job. It doesn't seem to really capture reality as we feel we experience it. So those elements that could almost be considered, they're all artifices really that we bring in, are actually to kind of get us closer to what we feel is a more truthful representation or expression of the reality. So something like the drum that was added through, and even the sounds of the sheep and the dogs barking, and there's all sorts of other sort of small sounds in there, are really to kind of conjure that, the truth of how we experience that moment through that artifice of the sound.
I think the sound of drums is something that we've used sometimes as in the sense, in this film it has to do with the sense of ritual that is true to what that experience was about. It was a kind of collective ritual of lighting this beacon, but there's also a part of it, the sound acts has an impact in your body. The drums have an impact on your body, like your chest resonates and reverberates with the sound. And we're interested in films that create that experience for people as well, that it somehow kind of enters into your body as you're watching.
I think Rosie had a
question.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that presentation, hearing more about your work. Hi. You sort of actually answered it in your response to the last question, but it was really interesting that you do that analogy with Hardy and his writing, because what strikes me is that's very much about the rhythm of ritual, ancient and modern, and that actually, you know, how we experience the world, how we negotiate the world is through that kind of psychological and physical experience. And of course, you know, kind of time passing, but also collapsing time. And I suppose but I noticed in the presentation you didn't refer to it as such. You didn't use the word ritual, but of course you just have in your response. And my question was whether that was deliberate.
Yeah, I think ritual is always been important for us, and understanding that really it is part of how we experience our art practice, because in a way we're drawing from our experiences. It always feels like there is an aspect that is a ritual for us, or we could also say therapeutic or spiritual. But I think what's interesting about saying that it's a ritual is that it also has that, like you said, this connection with a past or a tradition, and forms of behavior or of engaging with something that carry a certain meaning, or that activate certain kind of responses, and that you might not be aware of, or you might not completely understand, but they have an effect. Yeah, Hardy is fascinating with also how, because his works are so filled with all this knowledge about how to read a landscape, that what you know, we feel like it's getting lost somehow, and he felt it was getting lost already in his time. And that's fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Samuel?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Oh, which Samuel?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, I was wondering about your kind of attraction to rural spaces as opposed to urban spaces, you know, such as the city. And if this is conscious rather than a kind of intuitive thing, is there a kind of political aspect, you know, in the kind of romantic tradition, you know, of getting away from kind of industrial capitalism into the kind of romance of the landscape, etc. I was wondering if that was a part of it.
I think it's more instinctive than that. I think we primarily, like, the first thing for us is intuition. So first of all, our decisions are always intuitively made, and the analysis comes afterwards. The sort of looking at, first of all, we go with what we feel, what we're attracted to, and we don't judge it, we just go with it. And then afterwards we reflect upon it and try to understand maybe what it's saying, what ideology it's expressing, what it's revealing about us psychologically, and all of these other layers. But it's nearly always intuitive first. You know, a lot of these ideas that we've talked about here have come after making the work, or have been revealed to us through the process of making the work. So we're definitely not, you know, everything has a political ramification, but we wouldn't consider ourselves political artists. I think we're not trying to express a position, or to even actually comment on the world. We're much more interested in exploring and trying to be very open and be very receptive, and not to judge what is coming out of us or coming out of other people, and to look at it for what it is. I think we're also very much interested in the bigger pictures, the bigger spans of time. And I think this always makes us sort of think about sort of ancestors, and sort of the bigger movements that happen sort of, you know, over thousands of years, and how they kind of are unconsciously creating the conditions of the world as we're experiencing it now. Yeah,
I think also it's sometimes when you're thinking just theoretically or intellectually, you can just see things in boxes, and the experience of what those things are, something that is beyond those boxes. So, you know, even though there is a tradition of a kind of, like you mentioned, the romantic kind of attraction to a landscape in order to run away maybe from certain aspects of urban living and industrialism and all of this, the landscape, the countryside is highly industrialized and completely affected by the same principles that affect cities and urban spaces, that they actually don't, especially in a country like Britain, they don't have these ideologies aren't separated by whether you're in a city or whether you're in the countryside. And that, but again, that's not necessarily, I think what we're interested in is this experience of unknowing. That's something that can happen in any environment that you're in. But for us personally, it seems to happen more in rural places. And I think there's something about this which is actually about has to do with solitude, and the almost kind of stripping away the input that you're receiving from the world, from human world, I guess we can say. And when you are in the countryside, you can kind of experience things on a sort of different rhythm and time scale that maybe in a city the human rhythm and time scale is much more dominant. Yeah, I'll get another question. Mauricio?
Yes, hello, I'm Mauricio. Greetings from Peru. I'm a big fan from your work. And I'm looking, I'm hearing your work is indeed very joint. Being there, being in the place. No, it's a very haptic work is very sensuality with the place, with the sound, with the image, and with the time. So my question is, I have two questions. There's not the same questions. So the first one is how you can go to another landscape, to another country, and approach this new environment, no? Because I know that Mersea Island is your place. Maybe you can describe with the blind eyes or wherever technique, you know, because you know every place of Mersea Island, but how you can approach a new environment, a new country, and a landscape. And the second question is, we are right now living in a pandemic world, in an online communication, no? And if you see like an experimental project, how you can approach an online landscaping shooting, you know, like being not there in the place. So that's two questions.
Well, I think in a way the series that we made on the island, which came about through this need for us to create these short pieces and engage with this place where we are, it was also a way to create something for online. And initially they were put out on Instagram, and we didn't really know what anyone would make of these, because, you know, there are these sort of like very sort of simple pieces with nothing much happening, and they're about a minute long. It's just us standing there in these places. And we didn't know whether anything could be communicated in that way, or the experience would transmit anything. Because so often when we make work, it's very immersive. Like something like Notes from a Journey is supposed to be seen in this dark room, projected huge. We want the audience to be able to kind of be completely immersed in this journey. So release this challenge of like releasing these kind of small videos that people are seeing, you know, this big on a phone or on an iPad. We weren't sure whether that was going to actually evoke any experience of the landscape. But it turns out that it has. And from the responses that we've had, which have just been incredible, people writing to us that they've been watching them and seeing them unfold over the year, it's something has been communicated through them, and that people really do feel that they are experiencing the place. And one of the comments that's come up a few times is that the decision to place ourselves in the frame enabled people to understand and experience of that environment more than if we had not been in the frame. If we just simply filmed that space without us in it, it seems that by putting ourselves in it, it somehow helps people engage with it more. We don't know why that is exactly, but it's incredibly interesting to us that that's happened.
Yeah, and also I think now that the internet and these different technologies kind of also expand our experience of place, because you can, for example, without going to a place, see it through Google Maps or through pictures that other people have taken from it and, you know, and put online, and that kind of adds something else to that experience. Also, in a way, you can also create a kind of mashup of sometimes very different places kind of coexisting in your experience, you know. And these are all very new ways of being and interacting, and I think we're all still really just discovering, and we've explored some of these things in some of the works. Yeah,
and I think what's happening is the internet, the phones, the computers, they're already changing our relationship to the landscapes that, you know, that we're experiencing. When we went to the film Revisiting, that is about going back to Avebury, before we went, we basically went on a walk through Avebury on Google Maps, and in actually the beginning of the film, you see us kind of going through Google Maps, and that became a part of our experience as well. So it kind of can't be unpicked from that either. So I think it's just more layers that are being added, and yeah, I don't know whether these are good or bad, and it almost doesn't really matter. They just are sort of now kind of completely a part of our experience of reality, and it's, yeah, fascinating and definitely worth exploring.
And about your first question, which was about going to a place that we don't know, and how do you make work about places that you don't know? Well, I think with this project that we made about Mersea Island, actually it was through the making of the project that we came to know the place, and in fact we feel like we're just that there's still so much about the island that we don't know and that we haven't seen and that we haven't explored. So there is somehow this factor of time is very important for us in this project, of how the project was created, and what is revealed through it is because we've been able to be here for this period of time and looking at it for so long. But for example, with the experience of Avebury, it's a place that we've only been there a couple of times, and always for just a few hours. So we are visitors to Avebury in a sense, and in other works that we've done, also we've been as visitors. And it's very difficult it's a very intuitive response. We don't go in with an idea of how we're going to make a work about this place or how we're going to engage with it. We just go in as ourselves and see what happens. And we capture things with our cameras, or in things that we write, and in the sounds that we record. And it's by then looking at those artifacts from those encounters that we can begin to kind of, that something comes.
And it's about paying attention. It's about learning to pay attention to, you know, what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, and then also the things that are going on in here as well, and sort of just kind of observing those things and then letting those all be a part of your experience. So whether you're experiencing something for the first time or the 100th time, you're observing the same factors. It's sort of external factors and internal factors, and you're trying to kind of observe them and make sense of them and capture them in some way.
Yeah, I hope that answers your questions.
And Sean,
Hiya. I think you've just answered my question as well, or part of it. What I was going to say was that idea of spending a large amount of time in one place and doing, and then ritually, repetitively walking the same route. It's quite a gift to be able to do that. And the idea of knowing a place as well. Did you find, which is something that I've found, it's why I'm interested to know, that when you think you're getting to know a place, by doing that, by carving out that much time to try and kind of really get to know a place, did you find that there was this strange kind of paradox that the more you knew about the place and the more you attuned yourself and found the detail, the more you realized the absolute impossibility of knowing a place and its that kind of, I had to do that before I realized that, and I just wondered if you'd had the same experience.
It's like we've been here a year, and a year isn't enough. Now we need 10 years to really feel like we need 10 years to really get under the surface of it, and probably in 10 years we feel like we need a lifetime.
I think this connects with that idea that I was trying to say at the beginning, that it really is to do with the complexity of reality and the complexity of experience, and we are constantly actually creating frames in order to be able to engage with something, but if we take away the frame off, we can be kind of completely overwhelmed by the complexity of everything that exists. And where do you draw the line of where your vision goes to? It could go from here to the end of the universe, really. And that dimension exists in a small space as well. It's just about how much of your attention you put into it. One of the things that we were really attracted to at first in these walks that we were doing around the island was the hedges, because these were kind of these in-between spaces between the lanes and the properties, the fields and the houses. But within that space, there was all these different plants going, the thorns were growing, and you could almost visibly see them kind of intertwining with each other, and animals making their own passages in between. Somehow that opened the whole landscape for us, and we understood that everything was had that same level of complexity to it.
Okay, we have time for just a couple more quick questions. I'm just going to see what we've got here in the comments. Nicola asks if we mentioned working with various tools, and he asked if we'd considered making a film entirely from Polaroid photos, or at least a film with more prominent use of Polaroids. No, we haven't considered. I think Revisiting has a lot of moments of using the Polaroid, but yeah, I think we haven't considered that.
And Samuel.
Yeah, so Samuel, if you want to ask that
final question,
and then we better wrap up.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It was of a lot of help. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's about, I guess, artifacts. I don't know if you watched Godard's recent interview, but he kind of talked about like I guess like a way to get past the kind of how like images are kind of saturating every nook and cranny of existence. To a way to kind of approach that like I guess purgatory of distributed presence is by way of archaeology. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And I had a second question. If whenever you're taking the Polaroids of those, I mean the photos of those stones, is it like related in any way to suiseki, like the Japanese tradition of like stone collecting?
It's not something we've thought about. Yeah, I think we haven't seen that interview that you're referring to, but I think one of the way this idea of a world saturated with images is definitely something that we've thought about, particularly as we are drawn to making new images. We're not drawn to reusing footage or photographs. We're not interested in found footage. We feel very compelled to create our own images. And for us, the way we think about this is that even though the world is absolutely saturated with images, what we're really lacking is meaningful images, images that are coming from a place of absolutely having to exist for the creator. And I think you can really tell when someone makes images out of this need, because they communicate something, they have a vitality or an urgency to it, that when an audience encounters them, they can feel that and they know that there is some kind of purpose or meaning to these images. Whereas I think as a lot of the images we encounter, they are maybe just lacking in any real need, any real purpose. They're sort of images that can be discarded, or they're images that are in some form trying to sell us something. They're trying to tell us, they're either kind of political messages that are telling us what we should think, what we should feel, or they're trying to sell us, you know, a product or something. And I think this is why we're very interested in making work that doesn't tell people what to think or feel. We create experiences, and we're not trying to sell an idea, a specific idea. We're trying to create a space where ideas can materialize for each person, and that they will be on their own terms. Where, you know, all of you will have experienced something different from encountering our images and have your own associations, your own things you like and dislike about them. And as far as we're concerned, all of that is valid. Whatever you bring to them, whatever you think or feel when you encounter our work, is absolutely valid. It's right. It's your experience. It belongs to you, and it's important. And I think that's really how we approach that problem of this world saturated with just images.
And I guess what about the idea? Well, I guess it's kind of unrelated, because whenever you talk about the artifacts from whenever you visit the landscape, as kind of, I guess, would it be right to call it the point of reference?
I think the reason why we call them artifacts is because the artifact is an object that creates an experience, and it results from something, and that's what our images are about, and what the films and the photographs that we create and the other works, they are, in a way, they kind of hold some kind of energy or aesthetic kind of experience that then when you encounter them is you activated, or it activates that experience in you. And that's where the artifact comes for us. It's because it's something that is charged with meaning.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a great question.
Okay, so I think we better wrap up there. I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming and for these fantastic questions. It's been really great to have this opportunity to share our work and our ideas with you.